Good evening, my fellow audience and those who pay attention to our program, the whole wide world, and particularly the children of the former British Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. In this program, we want to update and inform ourselves of who the children of the former British Southern Cameroons are, where they are located on planet Earth, and also what has truly happened to them, what is going on among them, and what will happen with them in the future. In previous programs, we talked extensively about our place in the universe. We indicated that we are not an obscure group of people who have no future, who have been abandoned to themselves and allowed to be maltreated by La République du Cameroun. We were able to demonstrate that we are an integral and esteemed part of the universe that God created. There's a very big universe out there, the known and unknown. The known is very small, infinitesimally small to the unknown portion of the universe. And that the bodies out there are so large that the planet Earth on which we live is infinitesimally small compared to all the known portions of the universe. And we were able to demonstrate here that sometimes human beings think too highly of themselves. So the Earth is so infinitesimally small that the few individuals on Earth who think highly of themselves are literally going the wrong path. And we indicated that even though we are small human beings, we are precious in the eyes of Him who created everything, because we are created in His image, and He highly esteems each one of us and loves us. Therefore, we as Ambazonians, we are not second-class citizens as La République's government tries to consider us. We are esteemed people, and we are proud of being children of the former British Southern Cameroon, children of Ambazonia. And we will slowly be going deeper into our history in subsequent programs, and where we'll take it slowly and bring out factual details of who we truly are. As we indicated in other programs, that the planet Earth, 1/3 of the surface of it is made up of continental landmass, where many of the countries are located. The remainder of the 2/3 is full of water and water masses. And of the continents, Africa is the largest of the continents and the richest in terms of natural resources. And the children of the former British Southern Cameroon are located right there in what some people call the armpit or the ambit of the African continent, right there where the Gulf of Guinea turns from west going towards south, close to Nigeria, and La République du Cameroon embedded in there as a free and independent nation with defined borders. So we want to bring out how we have been and how we were encroached by others and how things have evolved over time. Now, we indicated that our land is populated by Africans who are dark-skinned, flat-nosed like myself, and where our people migrated from. We indicated that we came down the River Nile from around Egypt and Sudan and spread out all across Africa and are known as the children of Ham. And we learned that we have lived in our locations, in some of them, for thousands of years. The region where Bamenda, a part of Ambazonia, is located, of the former British Southern Cameroon, is strategic because the Bantu migration started around there and spread out eastward and southward. And the Bantu ethnic groups are well known in history and are spread out all across Africa. But they migrated originally from the Bamenda region. So that was important to mention about that. So again, as I indicated, most of the tribes that are living in the region or in the territories of the former British Southern Cameroon have migrated to their current locations, some of them for hundreds of years. I talked about the Bantu people who have been there since the 1300s. And then I talked about my own group of people who have been there for over 500 years. And there are different durations where people have lived in their current locations. It's important to be able to discuss with elderly people in the community or the chief palaces, the leaders, to know about the history of the individual ethnic groups. You know, some of the history is written down, like the Fumban people, but unfortunately, many of it is by narrating orally, passing it from mouth to ear, from one generation to another. And in the process, some information gets lost. But as sooner we get that information, the better, so that we don't lose details of what happened, how our tribes migrated to where we are, and what characterizes us. But yes, that history is there that people can gather to know exactly who we are and how we got to our current locations within the land of Ambazonia. Now, so in the subsequent programs coming forward, I want to show how people who are not us, people who are not like us, came to discover us, as they put it in their own words, came to encroach and reach where we are. Now, history tells us that as far back as 500 years before Jesus Christ was born, which would be about 2,500 years ago, more than 2,500 years ago, from Cartagena, which is modern Tunisia, a man called Hani was able to migrate, taking the coastal waters right through to the Ambas Bay region, where he could see Mount Cameroon, the tallest mountain in West and Central Africa. Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain in Africa, over 6,000 kilometers high, meters high, while Mount Cameroon is over 4,000. So anyway, this guy from Cartagena, or modern-day Tunisia, was able to reach that area to notice that mountain 500 years before Jesus Christ was born. And after him, you had the Portuguese also started exploring. I think in the previous program we demonstrated how exploration came from Europe. But anyway, the Portuguese started exploring, and from Portugal they came and reached the Uri River, where they found prawns and called it Rio dos Cameros, and that's where the name of Cameroon originated, because they thought that the bay was full of prawns. But anyway, that is about 1430 that the Portuguese came, Fernando Po reached that area and made that description. And so you find people reaching out to us, and you notice that migration or travel was very difficult in the past. Remember that today we have planes. People take it for granted. These planes that we fly today were only developed less than 100 years. It was only in the 1920s that the brown borders were able to discover how to fly a plane, and now we have flying sophisticated planes and even going up to space. So anyway, in those days, over 2,500 years ago, there were no planes. And then also, people traveled on the waters using boats and canoes. And it was not easy to take a canoe that is manually propelled, using hard work to travel long distances. And people were able to develop engines that could propel the canoes even further. That's how some of those people were able to reach. So we were undiscovered for a very, very long time because of difficulties with travel. Now, reaching out across the Sahara Desert, we had Muslim nations, around the Saudi Arabias and the northern African Muslim communities. They were able to cross the Sahara Desert and reach down towards where we live in the sub-Saharan African region, that is fertile land with trees and plantations. But they did not reach right to the coast. So you notice that the impact of the Muslims is mostly towards the north, towards the Sahara Desert. That is why most of those communities are Muslims, because they were impacted by those. The Muslims, they always came for slave rates, to take some blacks to go and use to do hard work in their communities, or they came to buy things honestly, or they came to exploit the land, because Africa is extremely wealthy. They have gold and so many resources. So Muslims came from the north. By then, the Europeans were not yet coming because they had not yet discovered how to travel from Europe. So, but anyway, with time, as they developed boats and engines that could propel the boats, and not human hand, manual machines that they could use, they were able to reach further down. And so these Europeans traveled through the oceans and reached the African coastlines. So one thing that you may notice is that most of the communities that live towards the coastal regions are mostly Christians, because the Europeans who came brought in their religion, which was Christianity, and they spread it as they entered the land. Also, as they came, it was not easy to go inward, so they entered through rivers or big rivers, which could still allow the canoes to go through. So you have like the Niger River, or you have the Congo River, the Zambezi, and others. So you notice that most of the discoveries that happened in the land of Africa happened through the rivers. And so as we come to the land of the former British Southern Cameroon, what we realize is that the Europeans, the Portuguese came, as I said, around the 1430s, and discovered Rio dos Cameros, and they went back and didn't seem to come back again. They went to other territories, ending up in Brazil and some other places in the Asia. But later on, as Europe continued to mature and develop, the European mainland is very cold in winter. For those who have lived in Europe, it's extremely very cold in winter, hard to walk outside under harsh conditions. If you live also in the United States, you notice that they have, in northern parts of North America, very harsh, cold winters. But also in summer, the temperatures can be extremely very hot and very harsh, difficult to walk outside. So what happened was the Europeans decided to come to our homeland to look for people that will do hard work that they didn't want to do. Indirectly, they came to look for slaves. So they came first to look for slave labor across from Africa. And so they came with ships and entered our African regions and carried away slaves. In Ambazonia specifically, you hear about Bimbia. That's where most of our fathers and sisters were sold as slaves to the Europeans that had ships in the ocean. It's unfortunate to talk about this, but basically the tribes that had difficulties with some individuals, they will sell them as slaves to the Europeans to carry them to the foreign lands, and the chiefs or the locals made money by selling their brothers and their sisters. I live here in North America. I've been here now for over 33 years. And when I speak to some African Americans whose parents came here as slaves, some of them are very angry. They feel like we sold them out. And they are not telling a lie. That happened. But anyway, the Europeans came first to take slaves to do hard work that they couldn't do. And so they carried us to the Central and South America and to North America to work in tobacco, coffee, cotton plantations in under those harsh weather, so that the Caucasians, the whites, who would basically protect themselves inside the houses while we do all the hard work under very harsh conditions, and our people died. And they carried the slaves also back home to Europe, to Britain, all across Europe, in France. And they did literally build those communities. Our forefathers are the people who built Europe and built Britain and even built North America. It's interesting to notice even what you see as government infrastructures in Washington, D.C., like the House of Congress, those are all constructions by African Americans or African slaves that were brought over here. So this happened around the 1600, 1700, that the whites came on boats to capture our people to go and do harsh work in their home countries that they would not do because the temperature conditions were not conducive or comfortable for them. Many of them were dying. And then with time, business people thought, besides selling slaves, that they will start doing some business with people on the African continent. They noticed that there are a lot of raw materials, a lot of activities going on, things that they don't have back in their home country that they would cherish for business purposes. So the business people came to buy things from Africa and carry them back to Europe. And so these were commercial trips done by business-minded individuals. But also you had missionaries, you had people who were Christians, and they believed that they needed to carry the word of God to the rest of the world and teach them to have the same faith that they have. And so what happened with the children of Ambazonia is that there was an African American, there were some African Americans that were in the state of Georgia in Washington, D.C., in the United States, somewhere around the 1750s, 1760s, who had been converted and believed in the Christian God of the white man, let me put it that way. And they wanted also to spread the word. And what happened was some of these were given freedom because they had believed and converted. So these Christians left Georgia, the state of Georgia, and went to Jamaica as Baptist missionaries. And they were working together and eventually got connected with British Baptist missionaries and were collaborating with them. And they started reaching out to carry the word of God, as they put it, to other parts of the world. Very interesting for the children of Ambazonia. The first missionary that came to the territory of Ambazonia was an African guy who came from Jamaica. His name was Joseph Merrick. So he was a Jamaican Negro-born missionary who was the first pioneer missionary to Cameroon. And he settled in Bimbia, around where you have the Ambas Bay. And he settled there in 1843. Before that, he had been in Fernando Po with Afeseka, a British missionary, and they were working together, but he went ahead and settled in the territory of the mainland of the continent, in this case, where you have the territory of Ambazonia, and he founded a church there in that place. And Afeseka was evicted literally by the Spaniards who came. They're Christians, they're Catholics, so they did not want Protestants in Fernando Po, so they evicted all the Protestants, and Afeseka left Fernando Po and settled and followed Joseph Merrick and settled in Cameroon. And basically, he started off in Douala, but eventually settled in what we call Victoria in the Ambas Bay. And so they had the mission in the Ambas Bay area. That's how they called it. And he called the town where he was settled Victoria after the king, the reigning monarch in Britain, Queen Victoria. So he actually settled there for around 1850, and he lived there till 1876, which you are talking about 26 years. And during this time, he established a government in Victoria that he called, and he even wrote a constitution, and he wrote the elements of the constitution and started ruling from there. So that's very interesting. It would be nice if you know the details of that constitution. So, and then he advocated eventually that the British government should take over the Ambas Bay region that he was now working at as missionary, as a protectorate of Britain. It took a while, but eventually Britain accepted around 1784 to accept to be a protector of that territory where Afeseka was. Remember, he had already gone back to Britain in 1876, and he died in 1780. Anyway, Britain eventually took over that territory and called it the British Protectorate. And so the land of Ambazonia, the territory that the British were controlling, was already under the influence of English-speaking people, partly from the United States, going through Jamaica, Joseph Merrick, and then Afeseka from Britain himself, and also calling the capital of the territory he established Victoria. And so Britain now was the protector of that territory. Anyway, they brought in the element of education with getting to know God. What I mean is they were preaching to the people, but they also created schools. They wanted the people to learn to read and write. And so you notice that the impact of these missionaries has taken a big toll on our people. That's why you have a lot of missionary schools all across the land of Ambazonia. The Baptists had come first, so you have Baptist schools with Baptist missionaries preaching the gospel, as well as schools teaching the people. They also had dispensaries, because many of those missionaries who came were dying from tropical diseases. In fact, at one time, most of the people who came with Afeseka from Britain died, and they were afraid, that they were going to lose them. But he was courageous and still went back. But anyway, so they opened dispensaries. So you notice the trifecta here: the preaching of the gospel, the teaching of the people as well as healing. So you see missionary education or helping people to have faith, teaching the people to be well educated, and also helping them to be healthy. You see it in mission organizations like, say, the Baptists. You see it even the follow-up organizations that came after the Germans came, like the Presbyterians, the Basel Mission, which came from Switzerland, and the Catholic came back later. So actually, the original missionaries to the land of Ambazonia, the territory that we call Ambazonia, the former British Southern Cameroon, were Baptist missionaries. And they came there in 1843 first. And then, as I said, a black African, Joseph Merrick, was the first. So we thank God for that. And then you also have, as I said, Afreseka himself. You know, the school in Limbe, now we call it, is named after him, Afreseka College. So anyway, these are the first people that came, and the government followed later. Like I said, you had commercial people who were coming to buy goods from the African continent and carrying it back to their factories. And one major thing that helped the governments to follow the missionaries was the Industrial Revolution. In fact, as the slaves were working in European countries and helping them to do mass production of goods, things were so hard. In fact, many of the slaves were dying under those harsh conditions. But they recognized that they could use machines, inanimate objects, machines that could produce things even more faster, much faster, and more efficient and better than human beings. So that's where the Industrial Revolution started in Britain. As you read, in mainland Europe, there was constant war between the European mainland, so like Germany and France and Italy and all those countries going across to Russia. But Britain was relatively protected by the water because it's an island. And so the Industrial Revolution literally started first in Britain. And so they developed those machines to manufacture clothes. They're needing cotton, which they were getting from North America, particularly using slave labor. And so this Industrial Revolution that was helping to create jobs and create a lot of more efficiency in producing goods that people needed on their daily lives is what pushed the governments to want to go out there and acquire territory to help get raw materials like cotton and many others for these factories. And so the governments, like I said, followed the missionaries. The governments were coming after the missionaries. And so that's when Britain came and honored the request of Afreseka to take that territory called the Ambas Missionary Territory to become a British protectorate. So the land of Ambazonia, the land of the former British Cameroon, was first under British protection. In fact, you can find stamps that show Queen Victoria and the land features of that area of Victoria, like the plantations and the trees and the palm trees and all the things that are produced there, as stamps that they were using in those days. But anyway, as time went on, many European countries were scrambling for raw materials all across Africa because they too had this Industrial Revolution develop among them, not only in Britain. It was also in mainland Europe, Germany in particular, and France, and many other countries. And they also realized that in their own geographic locations, they don't have a lot of the raw materials that they need for those factories to produce the goods that they need for their own use. So they had to reach out to other countries that had those goods to be able to get them. Like I mentioned, the cotton. There are others like rubber and many more. So that's where you have now the scramble for Africa. So many European countries started reaching out to grab as much land as they could get under their control. All the European nations, starting with Britain, of course, that came out first. Then, of course, you had the French, and then the Germans followed them, and so many others. Belgium came. The king of Belgium wanted to have what we call Zaire, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, under his control, because it was very fertile and had a lot of materials. And basically, it looked like there was going to be war breaking out between the European mainland nations. And so in order to prevent war happening among them, the Europeans decided then to meet at a conference and discuss how to share Africa among themselves and avoid war among them. And so at that time, the Germans had been able to succeed to become a unified nation. Before that, Germany was broken up into many small chiefdoms, dukedoms. You had Prussia, which was around Berlin. You had Bavaria around Munich, and so many other areas of German-speaking people broken up in small dukedoms. And so a strong man arose in Germany called Otto von Bismarck. He fought a war against the French to recover German territory that was around France. We talk about the Franco-Prussian War. In that war, the Germans crushed the French, and the Germans have always crushed the French. We'll talk about that as we go forward. They fought against Sweden and captured land in the northern parts of Germany towards Denmark, Schleswig-Holstein. They even fought against Austria to receive some lot of territory around where you have Bavaria. But he was able to unify Germany to be one strong nation, all under one government, under one currency, and speaking the same language and being ruled by the same monarch from Prussia. And he was a strong man in Europe who was highly respected, very powerful militarily. And so he used that clout to gather all the nations in Berlin to discuss how to share Africa among themselves without a fight, without war taking place. So I said the British had the territory in which Ambazonia now belongs. They called it the Ambas Bay. That's where the name Ambazonia comes from. So when you hear some uneducated Francophones calling us Ambazozo, it's because they're ignorant. They don't know all these things. So anyway, so the British controlled that. The Germans came and reached out around Douala and was talking to the chiefs of Douala and making treaties with them. And they almost had a warfare between the Germans and the British over the territory of the former British Southern Cameroon. So that's why they agreed again to meet in Berlin, all the nations to decide so that in order to prevent war. Now I'll go forward ahead of me here a little bit. The war that they were trying to prevent by holding the Conference of Berlin still took place as World War I and World War II. We'll leave that one for later. So they wanted to prevent war by meeting in Berlin, and that's where they sat and made agreements on how to divide Africa among themselves. And in the process, Britain decided to give up its former territory that Africa acquired for them. What was the British Cameroons? In fact, the missionaries had reached further inward, where they had reached towards the Bamenda lands, where you have the headquarters of the Baptists, and reached even through to Mambila, which is now in the northern parts of Nigeria, which was former British Cameroons. The missionaries had reached there with the missionary work that they were doing. You can see that their work reached all the territories that is the former British Southern Cameroon. But anyway, so the British sitting in Berlin decided to give up their control of the British protectorate to Germany, and they ceded the land of Ambazonia in 1887. Remember, the Conference of Berlin ended around 1885. It had a meeting from 1884 to 1885 where they divided territory among themselves. But Britain gave up control of the British Southern Cameroons to the Germans of the Ambas Bay Protectorate to the Germans in 1887. So now Germany became the main colonizing power of the territory of the German Cameroon that is pronounced K, starting with a K, spelled as Kamerun. That is the German Cameroon, which was much bigger than what is called Cameroon today. And Britain had Nigeria to the west and so many other territories. Germany had not only Cameroon, they had Togo, they had Tanzania, what we call Tanzania, they had Rwanda and Burundi, they had Southwest Africa. Those were German territories that Germany had at the time. And the territory of Cameroon was big and strategically located. And there was a disagreement between the French and the Germans in a quarrel over Morocco, some disagreement over that. And so to resolve it, France had to cede some of its territories in the Central Africa to Germany. So that expanded the German control over Cameroon, and included more land in Chad, in Central African Republic, in Congo, and even parts of Gabon. So that if you look at the expanded territory of Cameroon after Germany signed an agreement with France during peace talks in their conflict in Morocco, you notice that the German Cameroon extended. But throughout, after Germany took control of Cameroon, Ambazonia was always with what was originally German colony, German Cameroon. And so as time went on, the territory was controlled by the Germans. The Germans tried as much as possible to take full control, but there was resistance. Even the people in the coastal regions, the Bakwere people, they fought against the Germans. They resisted what the Germans were trying to do. And the Germans had to come in with military force using guns. And they had good ideas to put plantations, like all what we have down in the southwest now that we call CDC. Those products were planted by the Germans: the banana plantains, the cocoa, the rubber plantation, and so many others. Those were all introduced by the Germans. But unfortunately, most of the people who live in the area were not that hardworking. They were not, very willing to work hard. They were rather resisting the Germans. So the Germans had to go further inward to look for workers. And as they encroached inward, they continued to experience resistance. And the only group of people that befriended the Germans, that became friends with the Germans as they went inward, was the people of Balinyonga. And so they became friends with the Bali people. And they never fought the Germans, while the others, my own people in Mancon, fought the Germans against the Germans and the Balis. And so what happens is that as the Germans went with the Bali people are the ones who gave the names of all the individual tribes. So you notice that many people are called Ba this, like Bamendankwe, or like my people were called Bande. What the Bali people were saying, that the people of Nde, the people of the fun of that place that was called Nde, the people of, so Ba means the people of. And so you find many places being called Bamenda, Bamendankwe, Bafreng, Bafut, Babanki, and all those names, even reaching out to East Cameroon, which the Germans controlled, So you see that name Ba, that was given by the people of Bali. Now I will come to my own little group of people, how the German war of control took place. When the Germans reached the Bamenda lands and befriended the Bali, our people in Mancon and Bafut formed a confederation and fought against the Germans. It was a hard-fought war. During the first phase of the war that occurred towards the end of 1888 and 1889, the Mancon people and the Bali and the Bafut people defeated the Germans and the Balis. So they went and prepared to come back and punish these tribes for having defeated them. And you had a second war which took place in the 1890s. And this time they were able to conquer the people and burn the palace, and even took the son of Bafut and sent him in exile to Douala. That's another long story. And for me personally, the interesting thing is that my maternal grandmother, when the Germans reached Bafut, in the original palace of Bafut in Mbebli, for those who are from Bafut, they will understand that, they reached the royal premises, and that's where my German mother, my maternal grandmother was, and with her own family. So they ran and hid in a cave from these invaders. They were coming with guns. And unfortunately, there was a small child that didn't understand why they were running and hiding in a cave and was crying and came out of the cave. And a Baliman took this child and shattered its head against a tree, like a mango tree. So my maternal great-grandmother got angry and said, "What? You took a child and shattered its head against a tree?" And she came out of the cave, and the Baliman shot and killed my maternal great-grandmother. And then my grandmother came out and said, "What?" She was a young lady now. "You killed a child and killed the grandmother as well." And the Baliman almost shot my grandmother, and the German raised his hand up and said, "Don't shoot." And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was spared. And the Germans took her along with the team, and they traveled all across, going towards Babanki land, in Bikom land, Ndoplane, into East Cameroon, where after a while she then was released, and on her way back, she reached the land of Mankodo, and my grandfather married her, and my father was her last son. So that is the interesting part. So I know about that battle. The battle was so severe that at the time when Germany still had a king, a Kaiser, remember that Germany after the First World War lost the throne. So they no longer had a Kaiser, they only have a chancellor. And Otto von Bismarck was a chancellor. So anyway, when the Mancon people defeated the Germans, the king of Germany has so much respect for the Mancon people that they gave military gears where the son of Mancon can dress up and look just like you saw Otto von Bismarck in that picture. You saw a picture in the screen that showed Otto von Bismarck with a military hat on his head, and they also have this protection on their chest. Sometimes you will see the son of Mancon when he's being enthroned. He puts on that equipment that the German Kaiser gave to honor him for having fought valiantly and defeated the German forces in that first Mancon-Bafut war. So anyway, that's interesting there. So the Germans went further north, and any tribe can tell you about their own resistance to the Germans. The Bacon people can tell you, the Bansa people can tell you. They even reached Bamum land as well, and they had difficulties to conquer the Bamum people, and I think they exiled the king to Yaoundé at the time. And they reached up north and captured all the different territories. The Germans initially were in Douala and made their capital in Boya. And like I was saying, as they reached and used the Bali people and subdued the people of the north, then they now invited them and brought them down to work in the plantations. That's why most of what they call Grafi, the people who are from the grasslands, were now relocated south to the southwest region to work in what we call CDC farms. The word CDC was only introduced by the British after 1922. But it was plantations that were created by the Germans. And so the Germans brought people down from grasslands who were hardworking. These people are very hardworking. And they came and were working on the plantations, and they've lived there for a long time and had children. And once in a while, you will hear people try to pit them against each other and claiming that they are come no goes and they should go back. But that's what happened. The Germans brought them down. And anyway, Germany now took control of the whole territory and then relocated the capital from Boya to Yaoundé and controlled Cameroon from there. And the Germans were in Cameroon after the Conference of Berlin, like I said, officially from 1885 that they carved out Cameroon to belong to Germany until 1916 when the Germans lost the war and lost their territory of Cameroon. And so in principle, the Germans controlled Cameroon for about 32 years. And remember that Ambazonia was passed over by the British to the Germans in 1887. So the Germans controlled the territory of Ambazonia from 1887 to 1916, which is almost, you would say, about 29 years. And then from then on, the powers that conquered the Germans, as they say, now have control. It's an important segment that I really need to take it slowly, talking about the League of Nations, how that emerged, because before the Conference of Berlin, there was no League of Nations. There was nothing like the nations collaborating. In fact, it was the Conference of Berlin that brought the Europeans together for the first time to sit down and discuss of how to work together as a team and share without fighting. There were wars all across Europe. There were even the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. They had the Entente Cordiale where they would make peace and say, let's finally stop fighting. There was constant war all across Europe. But anyway, the Conference of Berlin was the first one that brought the European nations to sit down at one table and work together without fighting. And so a concept now emerged after the First World War called the League of Nations. And so the question is, how did that evolve? That is something that I would like to take us into slowly. But for today, I hope I've been able to reveal to us our location, about the people that have explored our area. I told you about the Carthaginians that came over 500 years before Christ was born, over 2,500 years ago, came in the coastline and saw Mount Fako and the roaring volcanoes and called it the chariot of the gods. They thought that the gods were coming out of the earth. So they called it the chariot of the gods. 500 years before. And so many other people have come, and the Europeans came and took slaves to go work in their home countries under harsh conditions to develop their countries. Most of the development you see in the Western world has been carried out by Africans. And even the money in the Western world, I can tell you most of it is African money, but it's a long story. I'm not going to go into that today. So I thought that was interesting, and I hope some people have learned a thing or two. I didn't want to go straight to the issue of the emergence of the League of Nations because it's another deeper discussion in itself, which carries us from after the Germans were crushed in the First World War going forward. And eventually in subsequent programs, I may talk about what happened to our people under British administration, and then also under German administration, and then eventually after the League of Nations under British tutorship or control of our territory on behalf of the League of Nations, and subsequently to today. I think I already mentioned that briefly when I said Alfred Saker, when he founded the territory, the protectorate of the Ambas Bay territory, he set his capital in Victoria and wrote a constitution that the territory will be governed by. And some elements of that was he banned alcohol, for example, because he did not want the people to drink and get drunk. He stated that before people cut trees, they have to get permission from the government. You don't just go around cutting trees like you see how Biason cuts all the trees themselves. You have to get permission from the government. So it's very interesting, in fact, to go into all of that history. I think I will be coming to a stop here, and we can play some interesting videos to remind ourselves of what we just talked about. For example, the scramble for Africa, if we can watch a video on that, it can be very interesting indeed. How the Europeans scrambled to divide the territory among themselves. Thank you very much.
The British ruled indirectly, giving power to certain chiefs while weakening others. They labeled some tribes loyal and others hostile. In Rwanda, the Belgians created ID cards based on ethnicity, Hutu or Tutsi, drawing artificial lines that would later explode in genocide. They made Africans speak foreign languages, swear loyalty to foreign kings, and believe foreign religions. In Congo, they taught the children to hate their own culture and worship their oppressors. They created a world where African identity was punished, and European mimicry was rewarded.
Imagine a world where everything is made by hand. Your clothes, your tools, your daily necessities. Now envision a dramatic shift where machines take over, doing the work faster, cheaper, and better. This monumental change started with the Industrial Revolution, a decisive era in history beginning in Britain around 1760 and transforming society by 1840. Why Britain? Why did the Industrial Revolution start there? There were several reasons, including it had an abundance of natural resources like coal and iron, which were essential for powering the machines and making the products. It had a large workforce ready to toil in new factories, a stable government that fostered trade and industry, and a growing demand for goods, particularly textiles. In short, Britain had the key elements to spur this industrial revolution. The Industrial Revolution was driven by several remarkable inventions. These technological marvels changed the way people worked, traveled, and lived. At the heart of this transformation was the steam engine. This invention was crucial in powering trains and ships and revolutionizing transportation by allowing people and goods to travel long distances quickly and cheaply. The steam engine also changed factories and mines by powering machines faster and more efficiently. Another groundbreaking invention was the cotton gin. This simple machine efficiently separated seeds from cotton fiber, speeding up the cleaning process and making processed cotton cheap and readily available. Then came the spinning jenny. This is a multi-spindle spinning frame. This innovation allowed a single worker to produce multiple threads at the same time. This was a major advancement in the textile industry, allowing to incredible productivity. Another game changer, the power loom. This machine was able to weave threads of cotton into cloth at a rapid pace using water and steam power. Lastly, the Bessemer process. Named after its inventor, Sir Henry Bessemer, this was a breakthrough in steel manufacturing. For the first time, it enabled the mass production of high-quality steel at a low cost. This process laid the foundation for modern steelmaking and resulted in a building and infrastructure boom. The pros and cons of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution would dramatically transform our world. While it propelled humans forward, it also brought significant challenges. First, let's look at some of the positives. The Industrial Revolution opened doors to unprecedented opportunities. It allowed people to earn more money and to improve their lives. On a whole, Britain experienced immense economic growth and prosperity. Education, science, and technology also leaped forward. This era was marked by incredible discoveries and inventions, laying the foundation for modern advancements. Lastly, the Industrial Revolution had a positive and profound social and political transformation. Cities flourished, cultures diversified, and democratic systems strengthened. However, this progress would come at a cost. The environment suffered greatly from pollution, adversely affecting both humans and the wildlife. Another cost was that many workers faced dire conditions, long hours, low pay, and even child labor. This exploitation cast a dark shadow on the era's progress. The wealth gap widening was another negative impact. The gap between the rich and poor widened, with the rich becoming extremely wealthy. This led to social and economic inequalities and conflicts. Britain's Industrial Revolution was not just a turning point for Great Britain, but it would change and shape the world. Soon after, similar industrial revolutions would emerge in other nations in Europe and North America.